Tales from Juthos, Part 10. "Allow me to explain a couple of things," said Wimarc Rand, eyeing the scantily clad dancer from across the table. "Firstly, if Esradis was ever to find out I agreed to this meeting with you, there would be 7 hells to pay. That should be proof enough of my good intent, heretic." The old captain walked around to the window that looked out over the great theatre, the name given to an enormous cavern that housed perhaps the oldest architecture in all of Gren. The winding streets had been built on top of one another so many times that only the most adventurous visitors dared to stray beyond the more regular routes without first attaining the aid of a trusted guide. From their position within the uppermost levels of one of the luminescence towers, they were afforded a rare sight of the theatre in panorama. Wimarc slammed the shutter closed. "Secondly, I should let you know I don't take kindly to people who don't see fit to grace me with their attention when I am talking to them. Get back. Do you know what would happen to us if we were both discovered?" The dancer smiled, the vague olive colour of his skin barely creasing as he curled back a radiant elven smile. "But my dear Whiteyard, I couldn't help but stare. Can you not hear the great beating of my lady's wings? Can you not sense her presence on the breeze? She longs to be with us. This is a magical moment, and I am glad you are part of it." His voice was like velvet, his passion as plain to see as the skin of his chest and thighs. Wimarc was having none of it. "And thirdly," he continued, "if you want a man to feel more comfortable about the decisions he is making to go along with your craven counsel, you bloody well stop talking like that." The dancer was a picture of a man unfazed. So great was his apparent reverie. With the indignant captain standing there with an irreverent finger pointed accusingly towards his face, his absurd moustache contrasting his reddening and angry bold head, the elf looked at him and let out a short, curt laugh. "Well, if it is not my words you want, whatever else would you wish me to do with my mouth?" Wimarc's face paled. The guardsman standing by the door, betrayed by his humours, let out a half snort, half snicker. As his superior's eyes turned cold and flickered towards him, the man simply held up his hand and shook his head, smiling. "Come on, Captain, if we're all going to be dead tomorrow, you can forgive me a little one," the guardsman said in a diplomatic, yet still very obviously amused tone. The dancer hadn't broken eye contact. "Why, yes, my dear, sweet Captain. You should let loose a little." A mocking hand went to stroke the side of Wimarc's arm, but it was tersely knocked away, the cold eyes turning back, away from his still chuckling subordinate. "It's not too late to throw you in a cell, you know." He broke away from the smiling elf, returned his flagon to his hand, and took a long drink from its contents. When he was finished, he slammed it down on the table, so as to make his colleague jump. He took a moment to smile and nod at him. "Nervous, are we?" Wimarc's small eyes boring into the guardsman as he raised his brow. Turning back to the elf, he rested his bottom on the edge of the table and folded his arms. "Right, then. I'm not here to play games, heathen. I'm here to find out what you've got in that witch in the rookery tower. Come on, then. Out with it. I'm a busy man. I've not got the time to stand around risking my neck all day." The slender figure folded his arms, his expression sharpened. Wimarc was taken off guard by the sudden severity, even though not a second ago he had asked for it. Perhaps his ilk really did take the word of their craven goddess as seriously as he had heard. The free men and women of Shavara's cult were known first and foremost to the captain for 3 things: debased hedonism and extravagance, nomadic lifestyles complete with all of the thievery that such often entails, and an incredible thirst for bloody and unnecessary rebellion. It had been a fine day when King Mentis had finally decreed their practices a blight upon his lands and good people. The question of how exactly this fellow and his troop had managed to continue seemingly unaccosted for so long within the port city was proof enough to Wimarc that they were dangerous. "In due time, my dear. However, you must first assure me that you can secure us passage upon brave Silden's vessel." Wimarc had felt a strong sense of foreboding about that blasted vessel ever since he had first spied it coming to port. His witch of a mistress had gushingly regaled him with the knowledge of why exactly it was that the king was both masterful and wise to employ the services of criminals. Yet loyal as he was, and though he had heard great things of both his liege and his accomplishments, he couldn't shake the feeling that the king's generosity was being somehow exploited. Whilst Esradis cared little for order within the port unless it befitted her to do so, Wimarc very much did. "Oh, I can get you on board all right. Though what makes you think that scum will take you? He doesn't strike me as the sort to fall for a pretty face, nor that of a fellow man." A wry smile. "Then perhaps it is good that you serve your city as the guard's captain rather than as one of its investigators. I have a rather different feel."
"I'm sure you do. But then I get the feeling that your need to join him runs deeper than that. What is it then? You off to join these winds I have heard so much about?"
Wimarc reasoned that it was at least worth a try. He was never a man who particularly enjoyed uncertainty in his actions. He liked to know the consequences he invited ahead of time. Not that anyone would have been able to guess that as a character trait had they observed him recently. Maybe these strange currents the dancer described really were bringing a change with them, in which case he'd prefer to see them gone. "Not a moment ago you were impressing upon me that you were short of time. To that end, perhaps you could keep your questions to just the singular area. Though you are correct that my troop have placed a great stake in accompanying the smugglers away from this place. What should we talk about, then, for you to aid us to that end? Devils? Dockmasters? Or my personal desires?" The moustached man chuckled and shook his head.
"Very well. I guess a man shouldn't be too greedy in his thirst for answers, just as the teachings of the bright goddess say. My chief concern is still for the good people of the seafront, and that means Esradis must go above all else. While she remains in that tower, we will never truly be rid of devils, and I'm sure monsters in the street will only last so long as the Ordinator remains ignorant to them."
Wimarc paused for a second, taking in whatever slight tells he could decipher from his co-conspirator's attentive expression. Considering for a moment, he took a deep breath and continued.
"The Aetherling and its crew are protected while they still act in service of the king. Not that we've let them in on that. As long as your smuggler doesn't turn out to have deserted that duty, neither Esradis nor anyone else can lay too hard a finger on him. Even if reports did say he ran off with that poor girl."
The elf's shoulders relaxed. The various coins sewn into the loose fabric that adorned his body rattled slightly in their hangings. For the first time, Wimarc felt like he was talking to an actual person. Elves were weird like that. "That is most gratifying to hear. I pray then that he does not see fit to stray overlong from his duties and vessel, even if I must admit my own curiosity as to what he sees in the Dravenfall girl."
"Yes. The poor girl whose name happens to be a closely kept secret."
"I believe we had just decided we were going to talk about your boss," the dancer replied, dismissively.
"Of course,"
Wimarc replied, though he could not help but wonder what other things might have made it to the elf's ears, and how. Nonetheless, despite his ever-deepening suspicions in regard to the intentions of the heretic, he still measured his need as greater.
"Well then, we'd better cut right to it. What do you have for me?" he continued.
The dancer closed his eyes for a moment, as if collecting himself. or considering how much he wished to reveal. A slight frown crossed his brow before he pulled his shoulders back and spoke in a loud, clear voice. The men in this city who consort with devil kind are of foreign birth. Their intentions quite unknown to me, but their origins unmistakable. They come unto Gren and Greater Mendes' kingdom from homelands of Corcylia, far to the south and east. I am sure you have heard the news, even above the rest of the noise in these ever more concerning times, of old enemies of Uskanan origin, a terrible foe of wicked devices and crueler machinery, bringing fresh invasion from their own continent to at last claim ownership over our dear Juthos itself. Wimarc nodded, his expression turning grave.
I have heard. I hear stories of cannons giving wings and ships that sail upon the air. Do you mean to tell me such fancies are true?
The elf nodded. That and more. Their affronts to beloved Javara know no bounds, and the terror brought with them drive even the most stalwart among us to rash panic, such as I choose to believe the case must have been for our perpetrators, for no rational man deals with those darkest of elements of their own free will. There was a bitter tone in the dancer's voice. Wimarc didn't know much of the wind cult's practices or preachings, but as he thought about it, he supposed that it followed logically enough that using the air itself for conquest was unpalatable to their general message of liberty. However, he couldn't quite figure out how all of this was supposed to be helping him remove Esradis from her station, unless...
Dancer, do you mean to tell me you have hard proof that these foreigners came to our country through this very port?
Not hard proof, no. But many witnesses who would gratefully testify against your mistress were they to receive the proper protections. Wimarc could feel the excitement rising in his gut, his hopes soaring even higher. In her position as dockmaster, Esradis was afforded a great many freedoms which he thoroughly enjoyed and exploited in equal part. Despite being technically unaffiliated with the military or city governance, she could still enforce her authority throughout the kingdom and maintain barracks beneath her commands to do so. However, one of the largest trade-offs of this remarkable freedom was that she was to be held solely responsible for any threats or criminal activity that made its way to the mainland via her port. If they could prove before court and the bright ordinator that the devils and their accomplices had slipped beneath Esradis's nose, then she would be on the ropes for sure. And if they managed to spread the news of her failure out to the rest of the kingdom, well, questions would certainly be asked if any of the other devil troubles had made their origins within the port city beneath the mountain. But he would have to be very careful.
What exactly would such witnesses be testifying to? What have they seen?
The captain asked, trying to underplay his enthusiasm with only middling success. The dancer did not seem to share in this excitement, however, but replied only in tones of sadness. It should not come as a surprise to you that the summoning of such damnable and vicious creatures comes at an equally damnable cost. Thanks in no small part to the proclivities of your ordinator, people going missing from the lower orders has become something of a fact of life. As such, abductions conducted by the summoners have gone largely unnoticed, but not entirely. When we of the Wing Mother's kindred first learned of this new plight, we hastened to investigate, and in doing so have compiled quite the list of informants and further clues as to the nature of these wretches. Wimarc took a seat. He had been so caught up in the joy that he might finally be about Esradis's unmaking that he had momentarily forgotten about the lives she must have cost. True, she had always been beyond harsh in her treatment of criminals, and she was never to be described as truly caring for the people she was supposed to be protecting. But if what this heretic was saying proved true, then she really had failed in her duties to both Gren and the crown. For all her smug superiority and posturing, these devil summoners had her beat, and the kingdom was in danger because of it. The moustached man checked himself. This was not the moment for elation, but a moment for sombre and righteous duty. He took a deep breath to steady himself.
Apologies, Dancer. The great feelings that your information brings to me had me out of sorts for a moment. What specifically do you know? It will have a great impact on our next steps.
Our next steps? Am I to consider us now in a partnership, then? The moustached captain remained silent. The dancer acknowledged this fact and continued. We know the names they have been using, the ship they came in on, who they paid, and where they have been operating. Wimarc's expression soured, a new anger rising.
And it has taken you until now to come forward with this?
Your city, your state, have branded us as heretics. Were we not to have as much as I am offering you today, we would have been simply ignored, or worse. Further, we now have greater cause to benefit from risking our lives. Will you bite the hand that feeds you, dog of Esradis? The dancer remained quite still, regarding the captain with a cold and decidedly matter-of-fact expression. Wimarc gritted his teeth as he returned the gaze. He hated to admit it, but the elf was right. In circumstances less dour, those who had strayed from Ketis's light like this man did so proudly would have taken pole position on his list of suspects. Indeed, he knew that many who shared his rank would have been more than tempted to betray their informants straight away, and by way of torture, rid the city of devils and heretics both. Somehow, this dancer must have known that Wimarc took great personal issue with these cruel methods of enforcement, and that he had a strong sense of justice to boot. It was a great shame that this made him something of an exception amongst his peers. The captain took a moment to gather himself, and then continued.
Would that I were a hound. I dare say a beast would not be so troubled as I. You have the right of it. I find myself asking your forgiveness yet again.
His voice was strained, but he did mean it. Ever since Esradis had settled into office and started to show her true colours, his life had grown as complicated as his sleep schedule was now irregular. That is quite all right. Your impatience speaks volumes of your desire for action, which you shall surely have. Wimarc raised an eyebrow.
Oh? You have a plan, then? What would you have my men do?
The elf nodded sagely. I do indeed. The summoners were not so foolish as to perform their dark rituals within their base of operations. The she-lichen hastens now merely to a site of convenience and decoy. Though I have no doubt she will encounter resistance of some kind at her hunt's end, the foul one's target has ever been Silden's cargo. When they sack those carriages and learn of Esradis's duplicity, they will conclude that the contraband still lies upon the Aetherling, and seek, therefore, to destroy it. As an administrator of this port's defences, I am sure I need not tell you how I surmise they would seek to perform such a task. The dancer paused for Wimarc's response, which came in a hushed tone.
The high cannons.
Just so. They were each referring to the great irons set in the ceiling emplacements of the port chamber. The high irons, as they were called, played a pivotal role in the cavern's defences. Being so high up and so concealed by the natural topography of the mountain, they were all but impossible to assail from outside the port with seaborne siege weaponry. Between all of the emplacements, they had full range to fire on any vessel that was anchored here. Further, as many suspected and Wimarc knew for definite, their payload had been magically and expensively altered to ensure their efficiency and their given purpose. If the summoners wanted the gnomes dead, then the high irons would certainly be the tools to do it.
Do you have any idea which of the irons they intend to use?
Asked the captain, deep in thought. I'm afraid not, replied the dancer sorrowfully. That was a complication. Wimarc could think of at least 5 of them that would suit. He would have to be extremely careful as to how he proceeded with this information too. For now, if this heretic's word was indeed to be trusted, he had the edge on the devils and Esradis both. However, if either party caught wind of his investigation, the whole thing would come crashing down upon his head. This was going to be tricky. Not impossible, but certainly tricky.
We will need to speak again, dancer. Thank you greatly for your efforts. May you walk in the goddess's light.
A final time, the elf smiled that beautiful smile. Roar in her wind, Wimarc.